In the summer heat of July 1863, when the Civil War had already taken hundreds of thousands of American lives and the fate of the nation still hung by a thread, a moment arrived that would forever be remembered as the turning point of the entire conflict, and it began quietly, almost accidentally, when two armies searching for supplies, direction, and meaning collided in the small, peaceful town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a place that had no idea it was about to become the center of the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. And as dawn broke on July 1st, Union cavalry under General John Buford spotted Confederate forces approaching the ridges west of town, knowing instantly that the ground they stood on could decide the future of the war. So Buford's men dug in, preparing to hold the high ground as long as humanly possible, because they understood something that would soon become clear to both sides. The ridges, hills, and fields around Gettysburg were natural fortresses, and whoever controlled them would control the battle. As the first shots echoed across the fields, a storm of war descended on the peaceful town, sending civilians running for shelter, while soldiers from both sides poured into the area, turning farms, orchards, and homes into battlegrounds. The Confederates, confident after recent victories, pushed forward with intensity, forcing Union troops back through the streets of Gettysburg until the blue-clad soldiers retreated to the high ground of Cemetery Hill, where they regrouped and formed a defensive line that stretched like a fishhook, curving from Culp's Hill to Cemetery Ridge, and ending at a rocky outcrop known as Little Round Top. General George Meade, commander of the Union Army of the Potomac, arrived late that night, quickly realizing that this small Pennsylvania town would decide the fate of the United States, and he ordered his men to hold every inch of the high ground, no matter the cost. On the Confederate side, General Robert E. Lee, confident and determined, believed that a major victory on Union soil would force the North to negotiate peace, possibly even ending the war, and so he prepared his army for a massive assault on the Union positions the next day, hoping to break their line and crush their spirit once and for all. July 2nd dawned with thick, humid air, and the battlefield erupted again into chaos. Confederate forces launched fierce attacks against the Union flanks, focusing especially on a crucial hill called Little Round Top, where a handful of Union soldiers under Colonel Joshua Chamberlain held the high ground with unbelievable courage, turning back wave after wave of Confederate assaults until they had no ammunition left. And in one of the most legendary moments in American military history, Chamberlain ordered a bayonet charge, sending his exhausted men running downhill with steel in their hands, surprising the attackers and saving the entire Union army from being flanked. Meanwhile, the center and right of the Union line fought desperately to hold their positions. As fields turned red, wheat flattened under cannon fire, and the cries of wounded men filled the air. Farms burned, fences shattered, and the once quiet countryside became a nightmare of smoke, explosions, and unimaginable suffering. But nothing compared to what happened on July 3rd, the final day of the battle, when Lee, believing the Union center had weakened, decided to launch one of the most daring and disastrous attacks in military history: Pickett's Charge. At around 3 p.m., after a thunderous cannon barrage shook the earth, nearly 12,500 Confederate soldiers lined up across a mile-wide front and began marching toward the Union lines positioned along Cemetery Ridge. It was a breathtaking, terrifying sight. Rows of gray uniforms moving slowly across the open fields under blistering sunlight, while Union cannons waited silently, watching the long line approach. And then suddenly, the Union artillery opened fire, turning the fields into a storm of iron and flame. Men fell by the dozens, gaps ripped through the Confederate ranks, but still they marched forward, climbing fences, pushing through smoke, determined to reach the Union line. Some made it, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat near a point later called the high water mark of the Confederacy, the closest the South ever came to winning the war. But they were too few, too exhausted, and too exposed. The Union line held firm, and within minutes the Confederate attack collapsed, leaving the fields covered with men who had marched bravely into history but could not overcome the strength of the Union defenses. When Lee met the survivors, he took responsibility for the failure, knowing the weight of what had happened. His army, once unstoppable, had suffered a devastating blow from which it would never fully recover. The three-day battle left around 51,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. And when the smoke cleared, the small town of Gettysburg looked like a landscape from another world. Homes filled with wounded men, fields scattered with rifles and uniforms, and families returning to find their land forever changed by war. As the Confederate Army retreated back to Virginia, the tide of the Civil War shifted permanently. Never again would the South launch such a massive invasion of the North, and the Union gained the momentum it desperately needed. Months later, Abraham Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery for the fallen soldiers, delivering the Gettysburg Address, one of the most famous speeches in American history, reminding the nation that the men who fought there had given their lives, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The Battle of Gettysburg was not just a clash of armies. It was the moment the nation began to believe it could be whole again. The moment when sacrifice, courage, and destiny collided in 3 days that shaped the future of the United States forever. And its legacy continues to echo through time as a reminder that freedom, unity, and hope are always worth fighting for, no matter the cost.